One of the big interpretive issues surrounding Galatians, well, there's, of course, the theological issue, what is he saying? But one historical issue is whether this was written to the North Galatians, that is, people sort of at the center of Asia Minor, known as Galatians, or whether it refers to the South Galatian cities, as they were known, the cities of Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. And though I favor the South Galatian theory, I certainly am not an expert on this debate, and good scholars line themselves up on both sides of the debate. Ultimately, where the rubber meets the road is to what extent Galatians 2 and Paul's rendition of that meeting recorded in Galatians 2, to what extent that's a reference to the Council of Jerusalem in Acts 15, or something that took place apart from the council. I believe the account we have in Acts 15 is distinct enough, or rather distinct, that I find it hard to believe that Paul would have been referring and detailing the same event, even from how it's spoken of as a private meeting between apostles. It seems to me that we have something different going on. But I don't want to be dogmatic about this, and neither do I want to focus on it. But do read Lee on it, basically pages 367 and following. I may ask in the exam, not the midterm, by the way, which is next week, but in the final exam I might ask you to give arguments for and against both sides. And you would draw those then largely from your reading. Now, of course, you know that this epistle Luther favored very highly. He calls it his Katie. It is my wife. And it refers here in the opening to the churches of Galatia. Let me get that in front of me here. Unto the churches of Galatia. So it's not just one church, but it's churches within a certain region. Now, Galatia, or Celt, is related to the term Keltai, or Keltoi, and related to our word Celt, the Celts of Northern Europe. Apparently, the Galatians were a group of people originating in Central Europe, Gaul, migrating in the 3rd century BC to take control of Asia Minor. And by 189, I'm pretty sure that's BC, that can't be AD. 189 BC, Galatia came under the rule of Rome. Roman emperors began adding surrounding provinces to the province of Galatia, and during Paul's day it was an enormous province. Strabo, the historian, confirms that during his time Galatia included Old Galatia, Pisidia, Lycaonia, parts of Pamphylia, and Cilicia, Tracia. Now, this has given rise to the two theories I just referred to. If this is Asia Minor, rough outline here. There were 3 cities, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe, that Paul visited on his first missionary journey. And the South Galatian theory takes these cities as being really the addressees of the Galatian correspondence. On his second missionary journey, we read in Acts 16 verse 6, talks about Galatia and Phrygia, that he goes there, and that seems to be more in the heartland, if you will, of Asia Minor. And he returns through those cities in chapter 18 and strengthens all the disciples there. So those are basically the facts as we have them in Acts and in the Galatians. So like I said, the main debate here is if he's referring to the churches here in the heartland, this must have been, if he's addressing himself to these churches in the heartland, so in this is the northern theory, he must be writing after the Jerusalem Council, because it's on his second missionary journey. And as a result, he must be operating with the Jerusalem decree in his mind, and he actually differs from it somewhat. So there's a tension there. Did he transgress the Jerusalem decree? Did he retain his own opinion, or did he submit to it? And with the South Galatian theory, people say, well, before the actual council, he took the opinion he did in Galatia, in the letter to Galatians, and later on he may have adjusted it or softened it or operated somewhat differently. But at any rate, it doesn't assume a direct conflict between the Jerusalem Council and Paul himself. So that's basically the issue there. Like I said, I tend towards the South Galatian theory, which would put this letter earlier and would circumvent that problem with the Jerusalem Council. Now, what was the occasion of the letter? It was really the understanding of the gospel. Paul refers to the fact that he had purely and faithfully instructed the Galatians in the true gospel. Galatians 1 verse 8. Though we, or an angel of heaven, preach any other gospel unto you than that which we have preached unto you, let him be accursed. He had even done this during an illness he mentions there in 4 verse 13. You know how through infirmity of the flesh I preached the gospel unto you at the first. This may refer, this is what some scholars think, refer to the stoning that he endured. Was it Lystra? Lystra, wasn't he stoned there? And thereupon, he may have then preached with this great infirmity that he refers to here. At any rate, that is debated. Since his last visit, false apostles had entered in. By the way, that reference there to Acts 18 is negligible, at least under the South Galatian theory. But at any rate, false apostles had entered in during his absence and corrupted the true seed by false and erroneous doctrines. They taught that the observation of ceremonies was still necessary. This may appear trivial, but Paul recognized this as a fundamental article of the Christian faith. And Calvin says, it's no small evil to quench the light of the gospel, to lay a snare for consciences, and to remove the distinction between the Old and New Testaments. These errors were connected with the wicked and dangerous opinion as to the manner in which justification is obtained. Notice this epistle, other than Hebrews, if we call that Pauline, this is the only Pauline epistle without a thanksgiving. So this was a very serious matter to the apostle, something in which he could not even utter this thanksgiving as he was accustomed to do, but held it in abeyance so that he could right away deal with the problem at hand. Now, if I can just say a word here. By the way, I never did locate my revised Romans outline, so don't wait for it. It's gone. And I won't ask you on the exam anything that was not on the outline for Romans. So none of the material in the New Perspective will be on there. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. But I did want to say a word about the New Perspective here in Galatians, because a lot of times the argument is made by N.T. Wright and James Dunn and others that Paul is concerned, when he talks about justification, he's concerned with the whole issue of table ethics, table customs, table fellowship. It's an ecclesiological matter, not a soteriological matter. Barnabas even flinched at the pressure he received from the Jews. Let's just look at that a minute for those of you who haven't looked at this before. Galatians 2. Verse 9, and when James, Cephas, and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that was given unto me, they gave to me the right hand and to Barnabas the right hands of fellowship, that we should go unto the heathen, and they to the circumcision. And then 11, but when Peter was come to Antioch, I withstood him to the face, because he was to be blamed. For before that certain came from James, he did eat with the Gentiles. And the other Jews dissembled likewise with him, insomuch that Barnabas also was carried away. When I saw that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I said unto Peter before them all, if thou being a Jew livest after the manner of Gentiles, and not as do the Jews, why compellest thou the Gentiles to live as do the Jews? We who are Jews by nature, and not sinners of the Gentiles, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ. Even we have believed in Jesus Christ, that we might be justified by the faith of Christ, not by the works of the law. And he goes on to speak about justification in the context of union with Christ, being crucified with him in his death. Now, N.T. Wright and James Dunn say, see, the debate here is about rules of table fellowship. And Paul is setting forth a doctrine of justification, which is basically one that cancels out these works as being necessary. We do not have to abide by the same ceremonial laws that these Judaizers held to, that a lot of ancient Jews held to. We don't need them anymore. And so, say N.T. Wright and James Dunn, the matter here is ecclesiological. How do we conceive of the covenant community? How do we conceive of the church? Is it limited to just Jews and Gentiles who become Jews? Or is it broader than that? But what's really going on here is, yes, there is an ecclesiological issue. And that everything that they've said up till that point is correct. But Paul takes the strong objection he does against this, because ecclesiological matters are based on issues of soteriology. And he makes that clear, especially in verse 14. But when I saw that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, I said unto Peter before them all, if thou being a Jew livest after the manner of the Gentiles, why compellest thou the Gentiles to live as do the Jews? We who are Jews by nature, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ. And so what he's saying is, Peter, your ecclesiology ought to be based on soteriology. And what's that soteriology? Justification by faith without the works of the law, through Jesus Christ and through him alone, through his death once and for all, whereby I am crucified with Christ. And so none of these works of the law, whatever they may be, ceremonial or meritorious or anything, have any room, any place in acceptance with God. So the ecclesiological matter has a soteriological foundation, and it flows from a soteriological reality. There is something at stake soteriologically, and otherwise Paul would never have had the vehemence he has, as he shows here in this epistle. So that, in terms of how this relates to the argument of the new perspective. You know, in this larger point raises the issue of, do we have an ecclesiology that's based on soteriology, or do we have a soteriology that we simply sort of fit into our ecclesiology? You understand that issue? There's a lot that's connected to that. It seems to me that Paul is always making his ecclesiology dependent upon soteriology. Look at Ephesians. He's talking there about the church as being made up of those who have been, saved by grace and chosen and all the rest. But it's soteriology that's really the foundation here. And ecclesiology grows from out of that. We don't just simply sort of plug soteriology into ecclesiology and that helps us along. No. It's the salvation procured by Christ and applied by Christ through His Holy Spirit that gives birth to the church. And the church then takes on her form and shape from out of that soteriological basis.